basically my favorite topic.
Now, a question. I was listening to another show. Was something about a tree you fell out of?
Yeah, what happened, Gary, was when I was when I was about 10 years old. I was living in Nova Scotia at the time, and I was just a precocious kid, running around. I had a bicycle, and all my friends had bicycles, and we used to swim in the ocean every day and go running and playing different games and baseball and whatever. And one of the things I loved to do was climb trees. We had some big trees near where I lived, and one day I fell out of this tree, knocked the wind out of myself, kind of knocked myself unconscious. And when I was unconscious, I had what you might call an out-of-body experience, or some kind of a precognitive experience, where I felt like, and what the experience was for me was that I was out of my body, looking down at myself, and my sense was that I was in my early 30s, 31, 32, something like that. And so they have this term in the East. They say that enlightenment is like a flash of lightning on a dark night. So, you can imagine you're in a dark forest or something, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a flash of light, and for just a second, you can sort of see everything, right? Well, that's what this experience was like for me. I don't know whether it lasted 10 seconds or 5 seconds or a minute, but while I was out, unconscious, out of my body, literally, I could see my life, and I had a very clear sense that I was going to be a writer, I was going to be traveling, I was going to be a teacher, I was going to be helping people live more successful and happier lives, and that this was basically my destiny. So when I came to, sat up on the ground, I felt that somehow I had received a glimpse, a true glimpse of my own future. So that was this dream experience that you heard me talking about with the other person. And that was arguably the most important and the most pivotal experience of my entire life, because it happened when I was 10 years old. I'm 70 now. So for the last 60 years, basically, this dream has provided me with the inspiration and the impetus to, first of all, study the mind and time and psychic phenomena and out-of-body experiences and things like that, to try and, first of all, explain what it was that happened to me, and then to use that knowledge to help other people do things which I had seen in this dream, which was basically to, learn how to live a happier and a more successful life.
Yeah, that would be, for a 10-year-old, I mean, it would be so hard to digest, all of a sudden you're hovering over your body, and you're seeing yourself, as, an adult, and, especially a 10-year-old looking at somebody around 30, that's really old. And, seeing that you're going to be, you think that also gave you the drive to do that?
Well, it certainly provided me with a lot of drive and desire to figure out what in the heck had happened. And, first of all, I didn't know if this dream was true or not. It certainly felt true to me. I had this sense right from the very beginning that this was a true glimpse of my future self, But I didn't have any evidence for it. These weren't necessarily goals of mine. It was just something that I saw in this dream, in this vision, And when I started to research it or investigate how it could possibly happen, I basically worked on the principle, or the idea, that whatever happened to me must happen to other people too. It must be, I always thought, it must be a fairly common experience of getting information from the future. But how does it work? And how come other people don't talk about these things? Well, of course, you've talked to a lot of people probably on your show that have similar experiences like this or something, related to this. We have these words that we use called, psychic abilities, psychic experiences, out-of-body experiences. Part of the problem is we don't really have any model, like a philosophical model or a framework within which these kind of experiences fit. And this is what I was searching for around 20 years, until I finally put together this model of consciousness that I wrote about in my book. And at least for me, and also to other people who've read my work and have attended workshops and things that I've given, provides them some kind of framework to understand their experiences too. And it's amazing, really, how many people have had these kinds of experiences, and lots of times they don't talk about it, but they just have a sense that this is what they're going to do. I mean, I was listening to an interview with Michael Jordan, and he said that he knew when he was 10 years old that he was going to be a professional basketball player.
Yeah.
And of course, as you probably know his history. I mean, when he was in high school, he didn't make the basketball team. When he got into college, he was kicked off the team. He just wasn't any good, But eventually, through practice and repetition, because he believed that this was his destiny, really, eventually he became, Michael Jordan, the number one basketball player, arguably, in the NBA. So I'm a big fan of golf. I was watching the Masters today. And Phil Mickelson and a lot of these professional golfers, they use similar kind of language. They talk about seeing somebody play golf when they were a kid, 5, 10 years old, and they just had this feeling that that's what they wanted to do. So not everybody has a sort of out-of-body experience, but what I've learned is that all of us, at least in some way, have some sense of where we want to go with our lives in the future. And if we hold that vision, we can oftentimes set goals and motivate ourselves to follow that path.
Yeah. I wonder, can you change anything too? I mean, if you, I guess you could, because, like when you were 10 years old, you fell out of the tree. Okay. By the way, did you tell your parents any of this stuff when you fell out of the tree and you went home and said, hey, I fell out of the tree and I, had this out-of-body experience? I'm just kind of curious if you...
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because what I saw in the dream was that I was going to be a university professor. I was going to be writing books. I was going to be traveling and teaching, and I was going to be sailing and involved in flying airplanes, or at least on airplanes, And so when I ran back, I remember running back to my place and telling my mother in a hyper excited voice, hey, I'm going to be a writer and a university professor, and I'm going to be traveling the world, and I'm going to be writing books, and and she just laughed her head off, thought this was the craziest thing that she'd ever heard, and that really affected me, and it put a damper on my enthusiasm. And to tell you the truth, it made me feel like I had done something wrong, because she gave me the distinct impression that this was crazy talk, me, writing books, becoming a professor, traveling the world, ha, 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 So I really developed a lot of self-doubt. And it took me a while, decades really, to work through some of that stuff, because I had no certainty except this feeling that I had that this was a true glimpse of my future. And so for the next 15 or 20 years, I was struggling to figure out what this dream meant and how I could create it for myself, when really I didn't have any real evidence that any of it was true, until when I got into my mid-20s and late 20s, close to my 30s, some of these things that I saw in this dream started to come true.
Yeah. And when it started coming true, I mean, did it give you where you sat and really contemplated about it for a while?
Well, it's interesting, because some of these things that happened, some of the things that came true, for example, they came true because I set a goal to do it and I worked towards it. So that's pretty easy to understand. I mean, you want to do something, so you do it. But other things came true in spite of my efforts. I had so many things I tried to do that just didn't work out. And then somehow, through some series of fluke or accident, they happened. And it's kind of like deja vu. You have this idea for something, and after the incident happens, you kind of look at it and you go, oh, that's what that was. That's what that meant. You understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's like you don't, it happens, but it happens in a way that you didn't expect.
Yeah. Have you had any more mind travel experiences? Have you been able to control it or anything in that situation?
Well, what I've come to believe, and after, like I said, I spent 20 years putting together this theory of consciousness to explain this. And what I finally came to realize is that every thought that we have is an incidence of mental time travel. So when you think about going home tonight after your show, part of your mind is in the future, imagining your home. When you remember what you were doing yesterday or on the weekend, there's a part of your mind that's back in the past, feeding you information from that place or that time, So to me, mental time travel, which, by the way, is a huge topic now in psychology. If your listeners want to go onto Google and just do a search on mental time travel, what they'll realize is, there's hundreds of thousands of articles being written on this topic. It's a huge new field of research, and it's very exciting. So basically, it's what I've come to realize is that it's thinking.
Yeah. Now,
we have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that some of the words that we use for thinking, and this is this is the problem that I was alluding to a few minutes ago. That part of it is we don't have language to talk about this stuff, so we use words like memory, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I was young, I learned that memory was a recording of the past, and as a matter of fact, for many years, and I think it's probably still taking place, people are looking for the parts of the brain where your memories are stored. Well, they haven't really found that place yet because your memories are not really a recording. What I came to conclude is that your memory is a connection. So when I think about, for example, what I was doing last week, I happened to be teaching last week. So, when I imagine myself, so you could say, well, I have a memory of teaching in this classroom, Well, what that means is I can see myself in the classroom. I can see my students, I can remember what I did. And I have these visual impressions and auditory impressions and sensory impressions of what I was experiencing in that classroom. So really what I'm doing is I'm getting information from that time. And that's what we call remembering, right?
Right.
And we tend to think that our memories are accurate. But of course, it doesn't take a whole lot of thinking to realize that a lot of our memories are completely faulty. Like we think something happened and we talk to somebody else later, we realize, oh no, it didn't actually work that way. It happened a different way, So our memories,
Anthony, too. Let's say your brain also has a tendency, like if you don't remember something, or you didn't digest quite everything, your brain will kind of like substitute in, to kind of fill it in with a false memory.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It fills in the blank, right? So we've all sort of had these experiences where we'll encounter somebody, right? And we'll say, oh, yeah, I remember you. I met you at a party a few months ago at so-and-so's house. I remember. Yeah, that's right. And then the person says, what? No, I wasn't there. I don't know that person. And you go,